Diego stepped out of the car, adjusting his suit jacket as he looked up at the towering building before him. The hospital stood tall and sterile against the warm Mexican skyline, its windows glimmering in the late afternoon sun. Diego, a self-made millionaire, had been here before, though always for business meetings, never for anything personal. Today, however, it was different. He was here for a meeting about a potential investment in the hospital's new wing. The numbers had seemed solid, and a few casual phone calls confirmed the project had a lot of potential. But as always, it was about the bottom line. As he made his way into the building, his thoughts remained focused on the deal. But just as he stepped off the elevator on the 4th floor, he froze. His gaze locked onto something unexpected. 3 little girls, no more than 5 years old, huddled together in the hallway, crying. They were alone, abandoned in a place meant for the sick, the injured, and the elderly. Their small, tear-streaked faces were a sharp contrast to the sterile environment around them. The older girl, who looked about 5, stood a little taller than her sisters. She clung tightly to the smallest one, who was only a few inches shorter than her. The middle girl between them seemed the most fragile, her eyes wide with confusion as she hugged her younger sister, whose sobs echoed down the hallway. Diego stopped in his tracks, his heart unexpectedly tightening at the sight. He had spent years building a business empire, negotiating tough deals, and living a life dictated by schedules and deadlines. Emotions, for him, were always buried under layers of cold logic and sharp focus. But these girls? They had none of that. Just raw, innocent fear. He slowly walked toward them, his steps cautious, as if he were approaching something fragile. He crouched down, leveling his eyes with theirs. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked gently, trying to mask the concern in his voice. The oldest girl looked up at him, her eyes red from crying. She shook her head, her voice small. "Our mama is in the hospital. She's really sick, and we can't see her yet." Diego felt a pang in his chest. "Is someone coming to pick you up?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The 3 girls shook their heads in unison, their faces a picture of sadness. "Just Mama," the smallest one whispered, her voice barely audible. Diego's chest tightened further, something he couldn't explain. There was no reason he should be feeling this way. He didn't know them. He had an important meeting to attend, and yet here he was, talking to these girls who had been left alone in a place that should have been filled with care. He looked into their wide eyes and found an inexplicable connection, a pull he couldn't explain. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to shift the conversation, to focus on something other than the deep, unsettling feeling creeping up his spine. The oldest girl stepped forward, her voice shaky but clear. "I'm Mariana. This is Clara." She pointed to the smaller girl. "And this is Eva," she continued, motioning to the middle girl. Mariana's voice was soft, her small hand clutching Clara's tightly, as if the bond between them was the only thing keeping them afloat in this foreign place. Diego swallowed hard, his thoughts racing. The name Camila suddenly struck him like a thunderbolt. He hadn't heard that name in years, not since he and Camila had parted ways so suddenly all those years ago. She had been more than just a fleeting lover. She had been the one he had let go without a second thought. A memory hit him like a wave. A quiet evening with Camila, laughing over wine, talking about their dreams, their futures. But then she had simply vanished. No fight, no argument, just silence. And now, here were 3 little girls, with eyes that seemed so familiar, staring at him. "Do you know where your mom is?" Diego asked, his voice thick with emotion. Mariana nodded, looking at him with deep, confused eyes. "She's in the ICU. They said she'll wake up soon." Diego felt his legs go weak. He stood up, a flood of conflicting emotions washing over him. He turned, heading straight for the nurse's station. Something had to be done. He couldn't just walk away. "Excuse me," Diego said to the nurse behind the counter. "There are 3 young children outside room 402. They've been here for hours, and no one has come to check on them. Someone needs to take care of them." The nurse looked up, a frown forming on her face. "Oh, yes, they're Camila Martinez's daughters. The girls have been here since this morning. We're short-staffed, and since they're not patients—" "They're scared," Diego interjected, his voice rising with frustration. "They're just kids. Someone should be with them." The nurse looked at him, taken aback. "I'll call the social worker," she said. But Diego had already turned around, heading back to the hallway. He couldn't leave them alone, not like this. When he returned to the hallway, the girls were still there, sitting on the floor, their small forms huddled together for warmth. They hadn't moved an inch. Diego knelt beside them once again, his voice gentle as he spoke to them. "I knew your mom. I knew her a long time ago. Her name is Camila, right?" Mariana looked up at him with wide eyes. "You knew Mama?" she asked, almost as if she couldn't believe it. "I did," Diego replied, his voice soft. "She was very special." He paused for a moment, struggling to keep the weight of old emotions from surfacing. Ava, the smallest one, looked at him with a curious expression. "Do you know when she's coming back?" Diego shook his head. He didn't know. But what he did know was that he wasn't leaving, not until he understood what had happened to Camila and what he could do to help these girls. They weren't just any children, they were Camila's children, and somehow, despite everything, they were now his responsibility too. As he sat there, watching the girls slowly calm down, Diego knew his life had just taken a turn. He had come here for business, but he was leaving with a promise in his heart. No matter what, he was going to be there for them, for Camila, and for this family he never saw coming. Diego couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this helpless. He had always been in control of everything, his businesses, his schedule, his life. But standing here, in the cold hospital hallway with 3 small girls who were staring at him with expectant eyes, made him feel small. The weight of the situation settled on him like a heavy burden. These girls were alone in a place where they shouldn't have to be, and yet, here they were, waiting for someone who might not even be able to help them. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. He couldn't just ignore this. He couldn't go back to his meeting as if nothing had happened. The thought of abandoning them, of walking away like it was just another inconvenience, felt wrong in every sense of the word. Before he could say anything else, a woman came rushing down the hall toward them. She was wearing a nurse's uniform, but there was a softness in her expression that set her apart from the rest of the staff. She approached Diego and then looked at the girls, her face softening. "You must be the girl's friend?" she asked gently, trying to offer some comfort. Diego hesitated. "I'm just someone who knew their mother." The nurse nodded. "I'm Lucia, the social worker. I've been trying to get the girls settled, but with the staff shortages, it's been hard." She glanced at the children. "They've been waiting all day, haven't they?" Mariana nodded, her face still tear-streaked. "We want to see Mama." Lucia crouched down beside them. "I know, sweetie, but right now we can't let anyone in to see her." She looked up at Diego. "I've spoken to her doctors. Camila is stable, but she's not awake yet. The girls are really struggling with not being able to see her. It's been difficult for them." Diego felt a pang in his chest. The girls were waiting for their mother, hoping she would wake up and somehow make everything better. And yet, here they were, clinging to each other in the cold, sterile hallways of the hospital, abandoned by the very people who should have been there to care for them. "I don't understand why no one's been looking after them," Diego said, his voice tightening. "They're just kids." Lucia's expression softened. "It's not that we don't care. It's just that, as I said, we've been understaffed. These things happen, and I know it's not fair to them." He clenched his jaw. feeling an anger rise within him. This wasn't acceptable. These girls deserved better. They deserved to be comforted, not left alone in a hospital waiting for a mother who couldn't even be there to comfort them. "Are there any family members who've been contacted?" Diego asked, suddenly realizing that he didn't even know if Camila had anyone else. Was there anyone else in the picture? Lucia looked down, clearly troubled. "Number. According to her records, there's no one else listed. No emergency contacts, no family. Just these girls." Diego's mind raced. Camila had always been independent, but this was too much. How had things gotten to this point? Why hadn't she reached out to anyone? It didn't make sense. He thought about the last time he saw her, how they had parted ways with nothing but silence between them. He had been too focused on his career to look back, to ask what had happened to her. But now, with these girls here, it all felt like a cruel twist of fate. "Is there any way I can help?" Diego asked, surprising himself with the words. He wasn't one to offer help lightly. In his world, everything was transactional. But there was something in his gut, something about these girls and about Camila, that made him want to step in, to do something.
Lucia looked at him with a mixture of surprise and skepticism. "You don't even know them, Mr. Diego. You don't know their mother. I knew her," he said, his voice steady. "And I owe it to her, to these girls, to do something, whatever it takes." Lucia stared at him for a moment, as if weighing his sincerity. Finally, she nodded. "Well, I suppose there's no harm in having you stay for a bit. We could use the help." She stood up. "I'll arrange for them to be taken to a small waiting room. It's not much, but it's better than waiting out here." As Lucia spoke to the girls, Diego felt a small sense of relief. At least the girls wouldn't be alone now. But it didn't change the fact that they were still waiting for a mother who wasn't there, for a mother who might never wake up. And Diego couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong with this entire situation. He needed answers. He watched as Lucia led the girls into a nearby room, and for a brief moment, Diego stood frozen in the hallway. He couldn't leave now, not when everything seemed to be falling apart. The quiet hum of the hospital machines, the distant chatter of staff, everything felt distant and surreal. He knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going anywhere until he figured out what happened to Camila and why she had kept these girls, these beautiful girls, from him. The evening stretched on, each minute dragging more than the last. Diego couldn't focus. His mind kept drifting back to the girls, to their tearful faces and the look in their eyes. There was a sense of loss, of abandonment that he couldn't shake. It was as if Camila had been trying to protect them, but at what cost? Where was she? And why hadn't she reached out to him all these years? After a while, Lucia returned to the room where Diego had been waiting. "The girls are comfortable for now," she said, sitting down beside him. "But I'm afraid there's not much we can do until Camila wakes up." Diego nodded, though his thoughts were still elsewhere. "What about her medical history?" he asked. "Is there any indication of why she's in this condition?" Lucia shook her head. "Not much. It seems like it was an emergency. They haven't been able to get many details from her records. She doesn't have any immediate family, and no one's come forward to claim responsibility for her. It's just the girls." Diego felt a cold chill run down his spine. Something wasn't right. Camila had always been independent, but she wasn't the type to shut people out entirely. Why hadn't she reached out to him? Why hadn't she told him about her life, about the girls? "I need to know what happened to her," Diego said, his voice firm. "And I need to be here for those girls." Lucia looked at him carefully. "You've already done more than most people would. But I have to warn you, Mr. Diego. This could get complicated." "I'm ready," he replied without hesitation. "I can't walk away from this." Not now. The next few hours felt like days. Diego had a lot to process. Camila, the woman he had once shared so many quiet moments with, was now lying unconscious in a hospital bed, surrounded by strangers. And her 3 young daughters, who bore such an uncanny resemblance to her, were sitting in a small waiting room, clinging to each other in silence. He couldn't wrap his mind around it. How had it come to this? Why hadn't Camila told him? Why hadn't she asked for help? His thoughts were interrupted when Lucia came back into the room. Her expression was more serious now, as if she had been dealing with something more pressing. "Mr. Diego," she began, her voice low, "there's something I need to tell you." "The Situation with Camilla is more complicated than we thought. Diego looked up at her, his stomach tightening. What do you mean? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lucia hesitated for a moment before speaking. Camilla has been living on her own for the last few years, according to her medical records. She doesn't have any contact with her family. There are no emergency contacts listed. It's as if she's been alone in this world, with no one to rely on but herself. Diego felt a knot form in his chest. This didn't make sense. Camilla had always been a strong woman, independent. Sure, but not someone who would just disappear from the world. There had to be more to the story, and the girls? Diego asked, his voice tight with concern. Lucia looked at him with a serious expression. They don't have any other family either. They're all Camilla has. No one has come forward to claim them. We've reached out to other possible relatives, but so far, there's been no response. Diego swallowed hard. He thought about the 3 little girls, sitting in the other room, waiting for their mother to wake up. He couldn't just leave them. Something deep inside him told him that they needed him maybe more than he needed them. He couldn't walk away from this. Is there any way I can help? Diego asked, his voice low but filled with determination. Lucia studied him for a moment before answering. Honestly, the best thing you can do right now is to stay with them. They need someone stable in their lives, someone who can take care of them. If Camilla doesn't wake up soon, we may have to look into temporary guardianship. But, she paused, looking uncomfortable. We'd need to go through a lot of legal processes to make sure it's the right decision. It's not simple, and it could take time. Daigo's mind raced. The thought of the girls being alone in this world, without anyone to care for them, hit him harder than he expected. They were just children, innocent and vulnerable. He couldn't bear the thought of them being taken away from Camilla, especially if she never woke up. I'll do whatever it takes, he said firmly. I won't let them go to strangers. Lucia looked at him, her expression softening. I appreciate that, Mr. Daigo, but you need to understand that the process won't be easy. The girls will need a stable home, and that means you will have to prove you're capable of taking care of them. It's not about the money, it's about whether or not you can provide them with what they need emotionally, physically, mentally. Daigo nodded. I can do that, he said, more to himself than to Lucia. He didn't care what it took. He would make it work. He owed it to Camilla and to these girls. He spent the next few hours with them, just sitting with them in that small waiting room, talking about anything and everything. It wasn't much, but he could tell that it brought them some comfort. They were quiet, their eyes constantly flicking toward the door, as if they were waiting for their mother to walk through it at any moment. And though Daigo didn't know how to comfort them, he stayed with them. His presence, he hoped, would be enough. As the evening wore on, Lucia came back to check on them. The doctors say Camilla's condition is stable, she said, but we still don't know when she'll wake up, or if she'll ever wake up. Daigo nodded, his heart heavy. I want to stay with them tonight. Can I? I don't want them to be alone. Lucia smiled softly. Of course. I'll make sure you have a place to stay here in the hospital. It's not much, but it's better than nothing. Daigo walked back to the small room where the girls were sitting. Mariana, the oldest, had fallen asleep, her head resting on Clara's shoulder. Eva, the smallest, was still wide awake, her big brown eyes staring at him as he entered. He knelt beside her, offering a gentle smile. How are you doing, Eva? He asked softly. She blinked up at him, her eyes full of uncertainty. I miss Mama, she whispered. Daigo's heart broke. I know, sweetie, I know, but I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. We're going to get through this, okay? Eva nodded slowly, her tiny hand reaching out to him. Daigo took her hand in his heart swelling with a feeling he couldn't quite explain. As the night wore on, Daigo stayed with the girls, keeping them company as best as he could. He wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was clear: he wasn't going to walk away. Not from Camilla, not from her girls. They were family now, whether they knew it or not. The following morning, Daigo woke up in a small room at the hospital. The sound of the early morning hustle echoing down the sterile hallways. The sun was still low in the sky, casting soft shadows across the room. He stretched and yawned, but his thoughts were already with the girls. They had all been through so much in such a short amount of time, and though he had only known them for a day, he felt more connected to them than he ever expected. When he arrived in the waiting room, Mariana and Clara were already awake, sitting up with their arms around each other. Eva was lying on the floor, playing quietly with a stuffed animal. They all looked up when Daigo entered, their faces lighting up just a little. "Good morning," Daigo said, smiling gently. "Morning," Mariana mumbled, her voice still groggy with sleep. Eva looked up at him, her big eyes still full of confusion. "Where's Mama?" Daigo swallowed, his throat tight. "She's still sleeping, sweetie, but she's going to be okay. We just have to wait for her to wake up." Mariana's face fell. "How long will we have to wait?" Daigo hesitated. "I don't know, but I'll be here with you, and we'll take care of each other, okay?" The girls nodded, but the uncertainty was still there. Daigo knew there was only so much he could say to ease their fears. The truth was, no one knew when or if Camilla would wake up. All they could do was wait and hope. The following days blended into one another, each one feeling like an eternity. Daigo remained at the hospital with the girls, making sure they were well taken care of. The nurses, though busy, always found a way to bring them small comforts. A teddy bear here, a coloring book there. But it wasn't the toys or the distractions that the girls needed most. It was their mother. They were waiting for her, clinging to the hope that she would open her eyes and make everything okay again. Daigo spent hours with them, trying to fill the silence with stories and small games. He found himself growing closer to them in ways he hadn't anticipated. Mariana had a sharp, inquisitive mind, always asking questions about everything, from why the sky was blue to how long it took to get to the moon. Clara was more reserved, but whenever she smiled, her entire face lit up. Eva, the youngest, was the quietest, often sitting by herself, hugging her stuffed bunny close to her chest. But there was a quiet resilience in her, a strength that Daigo recognized. Even if she didn't show it outwardly. Tonight, when the girls slept, Daigo would sneak away to visit Camilla's room, trying to gather any new information he could. But each time he stood at her bedside, staring at her pale, unconscious form, he felt like he was losing her all over again. Her once vibrant face was now a ghost of itself. The monitors beeped steadily, but they offered no comfort. She wasn't there, not really, and he wasn't sure if she would ever be. Each visit left him more frustrated, more confused. He couldn't understand why she hadn't reached out to him over the years. He hadn't been the perfect partner, but he had always been there when she needed him. Or at least, that's what he had thought. The silence between them had been so complete. Maybe it was his fault. Maybe he had pushed her away when he got too absorbed in his work. But now, standing here, looking at her fragile form, he realized how much he still cared for her. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to push aside the anger and confusion. There were more pressing matters at hand. The girls needed him. If Camilla didn't wake up, he would be the one responsible for them. He wasn't sure how, but he would find a way to take care of them. It was on the third night that something unexpected happened. Daigo had just finished reading a story to the girls in the waiting room when Luca came rushing in. Her face flushed with urgency. "Daigo, you need to come with me," she said, her voice tight with excitement. "Something's happening with Camilla." His heart skipped a beat. "Is she awake?" he asked, standing quickly. Luca nodded, though her expression was mixed with both relief and concern. "She's conscious, but barely. The doctors don't know what it means yet, but we need you to come with me." Without thinking, Daigo followed Luca through the hospital corridors, his heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't allowed himself to believe that Camilla might wake up. He hadn't wanted to get his hopes up. But now, as they neared her room, he felt a strange mix of anticipation and dread when they entered. Camilla was awake, her eyes fluttering open just as they stepped inside. Her skin was still pale, and her hair was messy from days of lying in bed. But her eyes were the same. The familiar warmth in them, the way they softened when they saw him, it hit him harder than he expected. She blinked a few times, as if adjusting to the light. Her voice was weak, barely a whisper. "Daigo," she rasped, as if she couldn't believe he was really there. Daigo froze for a moment, unsure whether this was real or just a fleeting dream. "Camilla," he said softly, stepping closer to the bed. "You're awake. You're really awake." She nodded slowly, her gaze shifting toward him. I don't know what happened. I don't remember." Her voice trailed off, and for a brief moment, the room fell into an uncomfortable silence. "Don't try to talk," Daigo said quickly, gently taking her hand. "You've been through a lot. Just rest. I'm here now. Everything's going to be okay." But as he spoke those words, he couldn't help but feel the weight of everything that had happened. The girls, the uncertainty, the past, the future. Camilla's eyes fluttered again, as if she were about to drift off, but then she opened them once more. The girls? How are they? Daigo smiled, trying to keep his emotions in check. They're fine. They miss you, but they're strong. They're doing well. Camilla's eyes filled with tears, and she squeezed his hand weakly. I'm sorry. I never meant to. Daigo leaned in closer, his voice firm yet gentle. Camilla, don't apologize. You're here. That's all that matters right now. He watched as she slowly closed her eyes, exhaustion overtaking her once more. He could see how fragile she was, both physically and emotionally. But at least she was awake. At least she had come back to them. As the room grew quieter, Daigo stepped back and sat down beside her, watching her carefully. The doctors had told him there was no guarantee that Camilla would fully recover, but seeing her now, even in this fragile state, made him believe that anything was possible. The following morning, Daigo found himself sitting next to Camilla's bedside, watching her sleep. She hadn't been awake for long, but the doctors were optimistic. Her vitals were stable, and they believed the worst was behind her. Yet, despite the relief that flooded him, Daigo knew that this was only the beginning. The girls were anxiously waiting in the waiting room again. They were eager to see their mother, but the doctors hadn't cleared her for visitors yet. Daigo was still unsure of how to handle everything. He wasn't prepared for this, not in the way he should have been. The reality of what needed to be done set in. He had to navigate the complexities of taking care of these girls, Camilla's daughters. His daughters now, whether he liked it or not. He wasn't just a visitor in their lives anymore. He was their protector, their guardian. The thought of them being separated, of them not having a real home, terrified him. When Luca came to check on them later that afternoon, Daigo made a decision. I want to make sure the girls stay with me, he said firmly. I want to take them in. Luca raised an eyebrow, surprised. You're sure about this? It's not going to be easy, Daigo. The courts will want to ensure you're capable of taking care of them, and there are a lot of legal hoops to jump through. Daigo nodded. I know, but I can't let them go to strangers, not when they've already been through so much. They're family now. Luca's gaze softened. I think you're making the right decision, but you need to be prepared for the challenges ahead. Daigo's heart was set. He was in this for the long haul, and no matter what came next, he wouldn't back down. The girls were his responsibility now, and he would fight to give them the life they deserved. The days that followed Camilla's awakening were filled with a flurry of emotions, decisions, and paperwork. Camilla's recovery was slow, but it was steady. She was still weak, her body exhausted from the ordeal, but she was awake, and that was all that mattered to Daigo. He stayed with her as much as possible, but he couldn't ignore the pressing reality of the situation. The girls needed more than just temporary care. They needed stability, a home. And right now, that meant being with him. The first time he took the girls back to his apartment, the silence in the car was almost unbearable. They were all quiet, each one lost in their own thoughts, their own confusion. Daigo glanced at them through the rearview mirror. Mariana was staring out of the window, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Clara, the middle child, was clutching her stuffed bear, her eyes unfocused. Eva, the youngest, was staring at her small hands, her face blank. Daigo swallowed hard, his heart heavy. This wasn't how any of them had expected their lives to go. He didn't know how to make it right, but he was going to try. He was going to be there for them, for as long as they needed him. When they arrived at his apartment, the place felt foreign. It had always been an empty space, filled only with the hum of his thoughts and the echo of his work. Now, with the girls in the house, everything changed. Their laughter, their chatter, it filled the room in a way Daigo had never experienced before. It was chaotic, but it was life. It was warmth. As they stepped inside, the girls immediately ran to explore, excited to see the new place. They weren't sure what to make of it, but it was a new beginning. Mariana rushed to the windows, gazing out over the city, while Clara tried to figure out how to arrange the furniture in the living room. Eva clung to Daigo's side, looking up at him with wide, uncertain eyes. Is this where we're going to stay? Eva asked softly. Daigo smiled down at her, bending slightly to meet her gaze. Yes, Eva. This is our home now. You, me, and your sisters. Her lips parted in surprise, and for a moment, Daigo thought she might ask him more questions, but instead, she simply nodded, content for the moment. He could see the trust in her eyes, the quiet hope, and he knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning of their journey. That evening, as they sat down to dinner, Daigo watched as the girls fumbled with their food, occasionally glancing at him for guidance. It wasn't easy. They were still adjusting, still trying to figure out their new life. But they were together, and that was enough. As they ate, Daigo caught himself telling them stories from his childhood, stories about his family, about the places he used to visit when he was younger. The girls listened attentively, their eyes wide, eager for any scrap of normalcy they could hold onto. He could see how much they needed it, how much they craved connection after dinner. As he was cleaning up, Daigo felt the weight of the day settle over him. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to let the girls face it alone. They were his responsibility now, and he was going to do everything in his power to make sure they were safe and loved. Later that night, as the girls went to bed, Daigo stood by the window, looking out over the city. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out to see a message from Luca. The custody papers are ready. The process will begin soon. Daigo took a deep breath, the reality of everything hitting him once again. He wasn't sure what the outcome would be. The legalities, the hurdles, they all felt like mountains in front of him. But in that moment, staring out at the city lights, Daigo knew he had made the right decision. The girls were his now, and no matter what came next, he was going to fight for them, for their future. He turned away from the window, his resolve firm. As he walked down the hallway toward the girls' room, he heard the soft sound of their breathing, a quiet rhythm that filled the house with peace. He stood at the door for a moment, watching them sleep, their small forms tangled in blankets. They were his family now, and no matter how hard it would be, no matter what came next, he was going to be there for them. Tomorrow was a new day, and together they would face it.